Hello, my name is Dr. Susan Swem from the United States, and I have with us two wonderful guests. I want to tell you a little bit about what we'll be talking today. We're going to do a brief podcast with a few of the wonderful people that we've come into contact over the last several years. And the topic is restorative justice within lived experiences of treatment. And what we have found at Now I See a Person Institute is that the majority of our clients who have had certain challenges that would be able to be discussed in a DSM, they find complete freedom from these symptoms that they initially had, that they no longer identify as whatever type of diagnosis that they were given, and that the road to this freedom and transformation is very simple. We have been calling what we do as practitioners humanizing ourselves for the other. And within these stories of clinicians humanizing themselves, we learn about what people need for these symptoms that many feel are often not able to have the experience of recovery, that recovery is inherent in every person. And so I just want to pass the baton now over to Margaret, and maybe you could just introduce yourself and why you're here today.
Hi. Yeah, so I started this journey several years ago. I won't say how many, working with Susan as a student. I had a couple classes with you, but then I started working at Now I See a Person when it was at a horse ranch and we were doing equine assisted therapy. And it was an incredible experience because I saw how quickly um, how quickly we were able to help people turn things around in their lives. We were working in particular with foster families and foster children and also their biological families. And I had never seen anything like it. I'd had a few placements before where I worked as a trainee, but there was nothing quite like this. And I think it was because back then I thought it was because of the horses, but I've come to realize that while they did play a role, it was that we were just treating people like people and not a diagnosis. We weren't using all of that language of pathology to make them into just their problems. Instead, we saw the humans who were dealing with problems, yes, but those problems were temporary. It wasn't a permanent condition of their mind. It was a temporary situation that they could get through, and they just needed to be encouraged and have their strengths be I just said encouraged, but basically encouraged or emphasized or yes, right, acknowledged.
Mm-hmm.
So ever since then, I I have never found anything else like it. Like you said, Susan, I moved away and I looked for other practitioners who would do what you did and couldn't find any. And so I ended up just calling you back. And here we are now working together again. And it's amazing. I love it.
And just for those who don't know anything about Now I See a Person Institute, is that we're a nonprofit institute devoted to research, teaching, training, and clinical work from collaborative dialogical practices. And I was fortunate enough to be with the Houston Galveston Institute at its inception of thinking about what collaborative dialogical practices might mean and how we might position ourselves as therapists. And always in the foremost of our mind was that symptoms and diagnostic descriptions were just symptoms and diagnostic descriptions. They in no way should lead the therapist and how to be with clients. They shouldn't lead the therapist in what kind of conversations they have with clients. What we saw initially was that our field had accidentally created a black hole. And that's a quote from Harry Galician. And this was in 2017 that this was published. But I think it was in 1991 that he spoke of this. He said, in the broad field referred to as mental health, we have contributed a language of description, thousands of words over the last century. Most might be called deficiency language, and that they create a world of description that only understands through what is wrong, broken, absent, or insufficient. What I'm challenging is a language of description through which we have created this world of what we call mental health and mental illness. And so he would go on to talk about how, in creating this world, we as people created this world as mental illness, that we see mental illness when it's not there. And we have a list of symptoms within a book that says if you see these cluster of symptoms, then that means that this person has these types of issues. And we overlook entirely who that person is and how they're suffering. And as John Schotter used to talk about, we apply these counterfeit methods, like counterfeit money, to try to, in good faith, help people achieve wellness. But instead of them achieving wellness, they they achieve unwellness. So I always give these examples is that maybe something happened and life is very tough. It can be very harsh. And recently I was talking to a clinician that at 15 she was put on medication in the United States, which happens to many, many, many um, young people. And so someone initially comes in and says, maybe I'm feeling suicidal. I don't feel right about myself. My life is so miserable. And so the curiosity to find out what is occurring that someone is miserable decreases. And what increases is that this person is high acuity. And do we stop it? What do we do to stop this high acuity? So we also are taught, at least in the United States, that these high acuity cases are due to some type of biological issue. Whereas if we're thinking about, the work that we did with Harry Galician at the Houston Galveston Institute in the early 80s, we did not see people with symptoms of having any type of biological nature, that people had things happen to them, that they were responding to those things that happened to them with a lot of alarm and desperation at times. But through the therapeutic conversation, that we would find opportunities for those things to dissipate, or as we used to call dissolve. And in talking about what is hard for us and talking about how we want those hardships to go away, our clients actually give us a map of how that can happen. But when we start inserting these biological paradigms, that map is put over to the side, never to be seen again. And we have specific techniques and specific ways of helping people, that is not something that they want. And it's not something that yields freedom, but yields a lot of times confinement and coercion and fear that they will never get well again. We've had some people talk about this as that the first time that they've had a diagnosis is like they have a cancer that they cannot get well from. And so if you're telling 15-year-olds this, it really does affect their lives in so many multiple ways. They start becoming hopeless that anything can be done to help them. And often the family is blamed for this when when it could be like breaking up with a boy at school. It could be so many things. It could be like my parents got a divorce. It could be so many natural causes that come to have unnatural explanations. And so throughout the work that we have participated in since the 80s, we talk with people in ways that does not promote deficiency language. We never go into a conversation and say, um, well, that I think that you're bipolar, or I think that you have eating disorder, or I think this, or I think that. Collectively, through the family and through the person who appears to be having the hardest time, we we co-evolve definitions, but the definitions aren't as important as how do we get out of those situations that they're in? How do people find happiness again? How do they find self-identities that I'm just a teenager, or I'm just a 30-year-old, or I'm just whoever I am, instead of being having a label. A long time ago, that 15-year-old girl was a girl named Betty, and we wrote an article. And in that article, she talked about that she was no longer Betty. She was Betty, the anorexic, and she felt like she was Hester Prynne from the Scarlet Letter. And even at that point in time, guys, she talked about that what created change for her was the therapist. It was a therapeutic conversation, that they didn't prey upon her weaknesses. But I remember she talked about that the therapist she had at that point in time, her name was Sally Helms, made her feel like she was the next Robin Givens, that she was going to be a famous sportscaster. Because when she went in and had conversations with Sally, she felt better. And little by little, life got to be the way that she wanted it to be. So instead of going into multiple hospitalization, being coerced that there was something wrong with her, or being coerced that there was something wrong with her parents. I remember one time she said to me, and I still have this on a CD, but it's in black and white because that's how old this is. We didn't even have a colored video camera. And she talked about that her parents, because sent her to the, I don't know, maybe somebody in the Houston area that had a big, uh, but was well known for working with people that had quote unquote eating disorders. We don't even call them eating disorders. We tend to call them eating challenges, or other types of words that have maybe some more normalcy and more kind of truth or personal truth. And so, but I remember she left one session and her mom wasn't able to go to that session. And the the um the father was a stay-at-home father. There were two boys they had adopted. She had an older brother and a younger sister. She was very much an athlete. She wasn't able to go to, she was benched from her team because of all the appointments that she was going to. And that really is when she decided that she wasn't sure if she wanted to live anymore. And I remember that for a period of time that they took her to somebody else because the physician that she was seeing wanted her to see someone more quote unquote experienced than Sally. And she had this story where her mom wasn't able to come. Her mom was the breadwinner, and her dad was a stay-at-home dad. He was a pastor as well. And the therapist did this blame game, well, it must be the dad because he's a stay-at-home dad, or it must be the dad because he's a pastor, or it must be the two children that are younger, that there were two little children that had been adopted that were like in grammar school. Had to be somebody's fault that this was happening. And I remember her crying when she was recalling that they blamed her parents. So not only was she leaving therapy thinking that she had an incurable disease, but she would leave therapy feeling bad about how they had talked to her parents. And then of course it was kind of insidious. Then she started to actually at times consider that maybe that those were the same things that were going on with her parents. So the reason why we wanted to do this conference is because we have so many people with lived experiences that want to be able to tell their story, that they want to talk about is that repair is something that does not have to be difficult. It can be something that can be very simple, that we can surpass our symptoms once we no longer identify as a mental illness symptom. We've had in previous conferences and in publications, we've called that shedding the limits of severe mental illness narratives. But what we find is that when people start to have hope that they aren't this mental illness diagnosis and they start to find freedom and they start to find self-agency, that life gets to start to get better. And it is something that kind of builds up a momentum and a life of its own. Everybody has a different way of finding that recovery, that wellness, that freedom that they want. It's not something that can be replicated with like client A or client B or client C, but it's something that happens over and over again. And so right now we're going to be collecting a few stories to present at this conference so that people have an opportunity to hear their view on this. Because who should be teaching us as clinicians? It's not myself, it's not Margaret, that people who have experienced these types of um, traumas. Very much, most of the time when we talk to people about previous treatments, it's so filled with stories of trauma. And people who have been able to be in these situations of therapeutic trauma come out the other end so strong and with so much of amplification of what they think should and should not be done in treatment. And so I'm now going to ask our wonderful guest if there's something that she would like to reflect upon on how we achieve this um, restorative justice for those who are seeking services. So I'm going to open that up to our wonderful guest.
Hi, thank you for having me, Dr. Sim and Margaret. Um, I would like to say firstly, after meeting Dr. Sim and her team, that their approach on how to help people was honestly life-changing, and everything that I was told and taught or said that there wouldn't be said that there wouldn't be a cure or any way out was all it wasn't true. And when I met with Dr. Swim, I saw that I really once I was able to see for myself that things can get better, and through a lot of negative things that happen through um clinical therapy, not with Dr. Swim and our team, but with other therapists that I was going to and treatments that would happen. It was all very negative and it affected myself and my family. But when I would meet with Dr. Swim, their approach was so helpful, and they saw me as a person, and um they didn't use me as a title, as the diagnoses I was given, or saying that there wasn't a cure for my life and that nothing would get better. Dr. Sim and her team approached it in a different way. They approached it holistically and trying to just be there and be listening and just talk to me as a person, because we're all human.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do think when you're a young teenager, specifically, or a young adolescent, and people think that um, clinical therapy, when you go to an office or a institute where they think it's gonna quote unquote help you, it's really not going to. And when you're that young, you're so naive and vulnerable to things that everything that someone says, you will most likely believe it and it will get in your head. And, you know, I got sucked into that and into the system, unfortunately, but I came on the other side after I met Dr. Swim. And I really think that people shouldn't, people should know that there's alternatives to help themselves, and that not, and going to therapy is not always a great thing, because sometimes it could be just lies that you're getting fed when you just need someone to listen to you instead of diagnose you and title you and tell you that that's it, there's no more hope left for you. You're going to be like this for the rest of your life.
So we're just gonna talk for a second, and I'm gonna ask some questions because, when you say that, you know, I wish so much that you were the only person that I've heard say that, but it's been a common theme that somehow, you know, young people, but all people are brought in that you have symptoms, and you're brought in, and either um either you're seen by um a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and they talk to you for a few minutes, and there's a decision that's made that defines who you are as a person and what's wrong with you, and it's based on a clump of symptoms. Like it's based on, I think very much in other types of um medicine. We might go in, and you hear, that someone has a broken leg, and so that they can see that broken leg. But we're talking about broken hearts, right? Or um, very difficult situations. How is it to go in and try to explain with your heartfelt desires of what's going on for you, and then to be told that what you have is an illness? So I was going to ask you, our wonderful guest, how was that for you when you were told that that regardless of what was the reason why the symptoms were occurring, when you were told that there was something clinically wrong with you? What did that sound like when you first heard it?
Um, Terrible. And I was so young that I thought it was like the end of the world for me. I didn't really think, when people say there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that phrase, I didn't really think that there was light at the end of the tunnel because that was just kind of it. Okay, this is your life. This is how it's going to be for the rest of your life. It felt like there was no hope for me, I would say. It was really bad.
And so, I know sometimes older people, like maybe, in their 20s or 30s, they don't believe it, right? Because they have more lived life experiences. Was it
Mhm.
something that, but it was something that you thought was true, right?
When I was younger,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I thought it was true.
Mm-hmm.
I I was also it was a very vulnerable time for me,
Mm-hmm.
and my family, and I didn't really listen to anything but the lies that I was getting told from all the psychiatrists, all the therapists, all the school therapists, or so-called people that think that they're there to help you, but they're actually doing the opposite in reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it was a very unsettling feeling. It did not feel very good at all. It just feels when you're so young. Also, as I got older, it kind of felt like that was it. There was, that's it. No more hope for you. This is going to be the rest of your life. Nothing's going to ever get better for you. And I really believe that.
And so,
Oh,
in believing that, how did it change your life?
In believing that, how did it change my life
Mm-hmm.
in negative aspects?
Uh-huh.
Um, Sorry, Dr. Sim. Would you
It's
like
okay.
me to talk about the negative aspects, like how it changed my life?
Yeah, how did someone telling you that you had a disease,
Hmm.
how did that then change your life, the world around you?
Would you like me to share like my experience in regards to that?
Yeah. Whatever feels good to you to share.
Okay.
Hmm.
Um, I would say it changed my life in very negative and unfortunate ways
Hmm.
because when I was younger, and I'm not gonna say what age,
Mm-mm.
when I was younger, I believed that there was no hope and it wouldn't get better, and that my family was against me, but actually in reality, my family was actually trying to help me and
Hmm.
do everything for the better for me. But at that time, I didn't see it because all I saw was my diagnosis as my title, and I would be like, "Hello, my name is blank,
Hmm.
and I have ex this, this,
Hmm.
this, and this." That's how
Hmm.
I felt.
Hmm.
And even though my parents and my family were helping me and wanted to help me, I didn't believe that. And I thought
Hmm.
they were against me. And that all the people, like the therapists, psychologists, counselors, I thought those were the people that were trying to help me. And I fell into everything that I was being fed.
Hmm.
As in, when they would say negative things about my family, I also believed that. I
Hmm.
believed that what they would say about my family, my parents, my
Hmm.
dad, my mom, my brother, that they
Hmm.
were against me when in reality, those those organizations were the ones that were against me,
Hmm.
trying to help me fall down their system, and I did.
Hmm.
Unfortunately,
Hmm.
that's what happened.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until so many falling down, going down, and going basically through hell after I
Hmm.
got into the system
Hmm.
of unfortunately to say, I fell into the system of foster care
Mm-hmm.
that when I was getting to go to that residential treatment place,
Mm-hmm.
that, okay, I'm probably gonna go back to foster care right out of that, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I started to wake up and realize, oh my God, everything that I had been through for those last number of years
Mm-hmm.
was a lie and it was hell.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents actually love me so much and they want me to get better.
Mm-hmm.
They want me to find hope to live again. And all they were trying to help me realize was that I was a person and that I was just going through a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
But that hard time became a hell of a time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Almost like those professionals were thought that you were defined by that terrible time.
exactly.
Sounds like. Yeah. Even turning you against your family.
Exactly. Unfortunately.
Mm.
So Margaret, could you say something a little bit more about that? Because, because we're not going to go into specifics here, but like
Hmm.
what when you think of somebody like being defined by a terrible time, then they believe these
Hmm.
diagnoses. They believe
Hmm.
that they have these kind of things or those kind of things or and because they believe that, then it becomes kind of true. Is that right?
Yeah, it becomes like a false reality, but
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
it's still a form of reality, right? And as we were talking, actually, an analogy came to my mind, and actually, our wonderful guest alluded to it when she mentioned light at the end of the tunnel, because I was thinking like, so so you have traditional therapy, and what it does is it finds you in a dark place and it says, yep, you're in a dark place and we're going to keep you in this dark place because this is what defines you, right?
Yeah.
But what we're trying to do, and now I see a person, is we see that you're in a dark place, but we want to bring the light of truth to your life so that it can improve. So instead of keeping you in that dark place, we point and we say, hey, look, here's this light at the end of the tunnel. Let's walk together to get there.
Yeah.
And then you get to the end of that tunnel and you're in this bright place now. And lo and behold, you don't need us to hold your hand anymore. You don't need any of that, because now you figured out the truth about yourself and your life, that you're not defined by those dark circumstances that you were in before, but you've found the tools to cope when when bad times might come. But you're not defined by them. Um you are not a diagnosis anymore. You are just you going through something, and you're going to be okay at the end of it. Does
Yes.
that make sense? Like,
Yes.
yeah, I was thinking about that as you were talking, and we were definitely on the same wavelength there, because you mentioned truth and light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but I'm just gonna like tweak what you said a teeny bit. So
Sure.
I never see anybody as a problem. See, I really don't. Like,
No.
I wasn't brought up that way. I mean, like, as a young clinician, we weren't taught that someone had a problem. We were taught it was a
Mhm.
problem system, right? If
Mhm.
anything, the what I was brought up as a young clinician that the problem was not inside somebody. So I've never seen a problem
Right.
in somebody. I've never talked to a person that I couldn't understand. I've
Oh yeah,
never,
I didn't mean to give the impression that, yeah, I didn't mean to
no,
give that impression.
I'm just, no, I don't think you tried to either, but I was just trying to tweak it so that to make these types of thoughts easier for other people to hear because people
Sure, sure.
they really don't understand this because they haven't had these lived experiences that all three of us have being
Mm.
together. And and so when I talk to somebody that's suffering, I see the suffering. I do not see a diagnosis. I do not, I mean, I know that there's diagnoses out there, but I never see them as part of a diagnostic criteria. And I've never had a conversation that didn't make sense to me. And, we were talking about this just briefly, but when we have to fight to make our voice heard, then that is a very desperate position to be in. And it's very
Mhm.
easy for people to see us as being abnormal
Mhm.
because the context demands abnormality. The reason why people healed so quickly at the horse ranch is because it was normal. We were all normal together.
Mhm.
Like, was the horses taking carrots differently from one person than the other? Did you, did, you know, did we ever have conversations that were like difficult? You know,
Mm-mm.
um, and so, I just remember, with this wonderful person having conversations about dogs and horses, and a mean woman who had a horse down the lane, just ordinary conversations, not conversations about things that were unordinary.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's
Mhm.
and that's what we need. We need care. We need um validation. We need
Patient.
Yes, we need to know things are going to be okay.
Mhm.
Not that things are not going to be okay. How
Yeah.
how would you like to go in and see a doctor and I don't know, you did break your arm and they're like, "Oh, you're not going to live through this." And you're like, "Okay, well, my gosh." You know?
Right. It's kind of like, you're you're stuck in a pit and someone comes in, they're like, "Oh, you're stuck in this pit. Oh, that's really terrible. I'm sorry. That
Yeah.
really sucks for you."
Mhm.
And then they just kind of like leave you there and walk away, as opposed to someone who comes by and they're like, oh my gosh, you're stuck in here. Here, let me get you a rope.
Mhm.
Let
Let
me
me pull
help
you
you.
out. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. That's a really good analogy, Margaret.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, instead
Yeah,
of
I think that's
instead of there's something wrong with you that you wouldn't know that you even needed a rope. like 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 you know
Mhm.
but when we're not believed in, we do not
Mhm.
believe in ourselves.
That's very true.
Right.
Very true.
And when we're told that there is something wrong with our family, we believe other people. You know? Like,
Mhm.
some people refer to this treatment as brainwashing.
Definitely. 100% I agree with that. Because it is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It definitely is. It's not normal. This is not how helping people should be.
No, in fact, that's something that cults actually do. They turn you against your family so that you're more inclined to follow their suggestion.
Mm.
Yeah, and it happened. It happened.
Mhm.
And
Happens every day.
go ahead. What did you just say?
Oh, oh no, I was just saying it happens every day,
Yeah.
sadly.
Yeah.
One of the things I never really, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but one of the things I never really figured out is that why do you have to keep somebody, when you go into a quote unquote mental hospital in the United States, you're not allowed to talk to your family and you're not allowed to have your phone.
Yep.
And because they use the ideas that you need to become acclimated to the unit. But doesn't that in some ways infer that you need to become dependent on the people that are quote unquote taking care of you. And that
Definitely.
if you have that many days, but see, they do the same thing in foster care. They will not let the 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 parent who they think is toxic, who someone has determined that was because is toxic, they won't let them talk to the children. And so the children are having therapy and therapeutic conversations about their parents without their parents being there.
Oh yeah.
That's
Yeah,
extremely toxic, if you ask me.
definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's not kind of, I think it's pretty inhumane,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
especially a minor, adolescent.
Yeah.
Your brain's not even fully developed yet.
Mm-hmm.
You're feeding
Mm-hmm.
them all this stuff. No, you can't talk to your parents. No, you're not allowed to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're not allowed to. What do you mean
And
I'm not allowed to? They're my parent, though. But they're not good. What do you mean they're not good? X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
You kind of fall into that trap. Then you kind of start believing that, what
Mm-hmm.
they tell you about
Mhm.
your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
then sooner or later, hopefully not, but it does happen, you believe that everything they said about your parents, you believe it now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's very
Yeah.
brainwashing.
Mhm. And young people are especially vulnerable to that too, as you mentioned.
And then what happens when, because I was talking to another person today about the same thing that happened to this person when they were 14. What happens when you don't trust your family anymore? How soul crushing is that?
And isolating.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And suffocating for
Mm.
yourself, that you don't feel like you have anyone to talk to anymore.
Mhm.
And it's also an attack on one's own identity
Mhm.
because we are a part of our family. Like we share our genetics with our parents.
Yep.
And if they are written off as bad, how are we supposed to interpret that? Then we're partially, quote unquote, bad
Mhm.
Yeah.
too,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and um, if you believe that about yourself, then it can have a lot of long-term consequences, negative consequences.
Definitely. Definitely.
But we have to understand is that therapies, even if they try to say they're evidence based and treatments, they're opinions. They
Yes,
are subjective opinions.
I
they
agree
are.
with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's just say, because I've seen this happen, you've got to understand, I've been in the field for like what, almost 42 years. So I have seen someone go into one therapist, and that therapist thinks that they're a nutcase. And then they go see somebody else, and that therapist validates them because
Mm-hmm.
they're hearing it from different stories.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our colleague says that, when he was young, our colleague that participates with conferences with us, Dr. Rod Nardi, he says when he was young, he was savage. And one of the things that he figured out is that when he was doing I hope I'm doing a good credit to his story, but when he was in his, you know, training in medical school, he would see everybody being diagnosed as ADHD or bipolar with psychotic features or whatever, and he'd be like, "Well, these kids are like me. Why are these kids being diagnosed?" And when I
Mm.
started questioning it, he said then he learned about submission, right? You don't question those kind of things. And then his curiosity waned, right? Because all the other psychiatrists thought that these people were crazy, then you start to see crazy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about our wonderful guest, our wonderful, beautiful, brave, super strong in their voice, that when I think about our wonderful guests, that what would have happened when those initial moments of misery were noticed at the school and someone would have said, it's going to be okay. Why don't we talk every day about this and walk around the school, have picnics, have Taco Tuesday? Like, we'll just, we'll figure this out.
I think that alternative would have been so much better, but
Hmm.
it's too late for that. But I don't need it anymore. But if that was the go-to alternative when all of this first began,
Hmm.
oh my gosh, I really think things would have gotten better faster than they got worse.
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't think I would have gone down the whole rabbit hole and felt like if I was told that first, not to just sit in the office and talk to your counselor, especially at a school when you're middle school, I would say this all started in eighth grade. I think that would have gone a lot better. Because not even very soon after, it just feels like you're the anchor and you're gonna be sunk to the depth to the bottom of the ocean
Hmm.
and get up.
Hmm.
That's how it really felt after.
Hmm. And
Mm.
there's nobody that can pull that anchor up.
Yeah, it's really hard to do it, but I don't think anyone would have been able to.
But you think about this. Let's just say that that happened to you on a Thursday, that you got thrown to the ocean with the anchor. There was Wednesday and Tuesday and Monday and Sunday and Saturday and so forth before that.
Uh-huh.
You weren't you weren't in an ocean, you know? It, but then all of a sudden the the steps that took to quote unquote correct that Thursday led to a completely different language, a completely different lifestyle, a completely different forecasting, not just
Hmm.
of the future, but of how each day was going to go.
And it all happened very fast.
Mhm.
Kind of like, I mean, I get sad when I think about it,
Mhm.
but I feel like a lot of my childhood was stripped from that.
Mhm.
If certain things didn't happen the way it did,
Mhm.
maybe or maybe not. It's kind of like a what if rhetorical thought, but I feel like I got stripped of that, of of a childhood, of
Mhm.
those teen years that a young person is supposed to enjoy and supposed to live
Mhm.
in different ways and instead of getting sucked into a whole
Mhm.
system that's
Mhm.
just tumble after tumble after tumble, you know? Just
Mhm.
back to back, day and night.
Mhm. I talked to a young guy recently that had just he had gotten out of rehab, like I think in August, and he was the one that talked about that, the same symptoms that we're talking about for this conference with our Greek colleagues. And he talked about it as being cohesion and confinement. But he also talked about that he was in a constant state of anxiety. He wasn't ruling his roost. He wasn't making his own decisions. And he was told that he was never going to be better. He would never get better. That this was something was going to have to learn to live with, and that it would always be there. And his parents were told the same things. That would always be there. And so we'd like to think that somehow as many children are not impacted by this as are, but the treatment that we're providing them with is making them sick. And I know as a researcher that I have never put anybody in a hospital. I have never put anybody on medication. I've never referred for medication. I've never told anybody that they were a mental illness diagnosis. Not once. Not even someone I didn't like when I was angry. I've never said the words.
Mm-hmm.
I've never looked at somebody like they had something wrong with them. And so the so when we talk as one human to another, and we figure out how the human who's coming to talk to us wants life to be different, and collectively we find out for how that to be different, and then it becomes different, and then they achieve what they want in life, and it's not hard. How do we help people know that these are viable alternatives? And I'm going to give you the last words and then we'll wrap up.
Would you like to go first, or would you like me to?
You could go first, Margaret.
Okay. So the question was, how can we help other people to see that this is a viable alternative?
Both clinicians and people who suffer.
Yeah. Well, I think I appreciate the testimonials of those who have come to us, when they were in pretty dire straits in their lives. They've come to us, and I appreciate their voices when they speak about it, either in a podcast like this, or they're willing to have us write about it. I think that's definitely one way that we can create awareness that this is a viable option. And I was just thinking, like, what a major difference is we're speaking life affirming words
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
everybody who comes to see us, rather than
Mhm.
negativity.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many who will listen to this have a biblical worldview, but I definitely do. And we're told to encourage one another and build each other up.
Uh-huh.
Speak words of life to those around you. And that's once you have had that done for you, once you've been given the example, I think that can be spread. We can do that for other people. Um, and that's another way to spread awareness that this works, I think, is just, almost like a form of evangelism, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
where we just pass it on,
Yeah.
pass on the life affirming words. So those are my 2 cents regarding that.
I love that. I
Thank
love
you.
that. Dr. Sim, do you mind repeating the question one last time?
Never. I mean, like, I'm just so thrilled to have this opportunity for us to talk. So people are going to say, it can't be that easy. They're going to say that, you mean just talking to people positively and, talking about what they want to accomplish in life and having conversations where they're genuine and where We don't put people on the spot. We don't tell them that they're never going to get well. We don't tell them that the situation is hopeless and serious.
Mm-hmm.
There used to be a book out called that the situation is hopeless but not serious. But but that's for another conversation. But that was a solution focused book. But the conversations that we have with the people that we care about that are going through difficult times, they're not skill set conversations. We don't follow a script.
Mm-hmm.
This day I'm going to go in and talk to this person, and that day I'm going to talk to this person, and I'm going to talk to this person for the first 15 minutes about this. It's not a scripted conversation. It's a genuine, present, intimate conversation about how does happiness occur? How does how do how do we have the goals, even if the goal for that day is just to have a good day
Mm-hmm.
that builds upon something else, and then the days become more frequent where happiness is occurring or hope is occurring or or just a lack of misery is occurring, and that builds upon people starting to believe in themselves again, and not thinking that there's something wrong with them, and not thinking that they're incurable. And when I see people not believing that they're a diagnosis anymore, it's almost like that is the caveat, that then, like like all of a sudden it's like there's this running for freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
they're empowered to do anything they've set their mind to.
Mhm. Because there's nothing keeping them from doing it
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
any longer. So,
Hmm.
how do we help clinicians know that this is a true possibility, and that if they can develop different relationships and conversations with the people that they want to help, that they will have significant different outcomes?
Very good question. Um, I'll make it simple. I think that this is for clinicians that are like more clinical based within the
Hmm.
offices, right?
Hmm.
Um, I would honestly and simply say, like, I know the institute is called Now I See a Person Institute, but literally, I think they should just start seeing people as a person,
Hmm.
plain
Hmm.
and simple. You know, they may say, well, it's not, but it is. I'd argue to say that it is because you're a person yourself talking to another person. You know, I don't know what their belief would be or how they would feel if someone told them everything that they're telling their client, but they themselves are a person and should be able to look at the person in front of them and just listen and just be there and not really push everything that they were taught through schools down someone's throat, you know?
Hmm.
And maybe they could take a different approach by just, I wouldn't really know what to say. I would say they could try taking, I would say to maybe take a different approach. Hmm,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's tricky actually.
Hmm.
Everybody's different. Like you were saying, something that you just said within the last 5 minutes stuck with me, but it's true. You know, I'm talking about Now I See a Person Institute regarding
Hmm.
this. When you guys say that we're not reading script, everything is genuine, we're patient and we're loving, it's true because you guys are. And because me as a former client, I felt that. And I think that the clinicians that are going into, and now this is regarding the clinicians within the offices, not now I see a person institute.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
think those clinicians, you know, even though they were taught what they were taught, every person is different.
mhm,
And they should take into consideration, this is a human being. This person's life, what you say, especially if they're really young too, will affect them. So watch what you're gonna say because,
mhm,
you know, they're coming to you with very dire and very vulnerable stages in their life. And if you really are there to help them, you should look at them as a human being. You know, they could have children of their own that are coming to people that need help. And it's kind of like to say, I hate to say this, but I'll say it. How would you like it if someone was telling your child everything that you're telling your clients, you know?
mhm.
And it's not a very settling feeling being labeled, being titled. Um, so I would say be patient. Be patient with people because everyone's going through different things in their life, and sometimes all you need is someone to listen. And as you said, Dr. Sim and Margaret, just being that positive voice. And I loved what Margaret said to speak life to people as in um
Mm.
um speak with love and speak with patience, speak that you care. And I feel like that is a really important thing, no matter what age you are, to be doing that for another person, especially if they're coming to you for help.
Mm.
That's what I have to say.
Well,
Yeah, well said.
well said. Well said. You know, um, I'm hoping that this wonderful person can come and do some more podcasts with us. It was such a joy. You know, one of the things that we have been doing over the past 2 or 3 years is that we've been having people that have been with us at one point in time to be able to talk with other clients or maybe other families. And especially about these kind of symptoms that we're talking about. When you're talking to, let's just say that you're talking to a mother and you're telling that mother of somebody that of a child, probably a teenager that's going through these types of hard times, and you say to them, I went through these hard times and I'm fine and I'm happy. And as I heard somebody say the other day, that often talks with some of the people that we work with at the beginning, they said things like, I was worse off. Like you think as bad was going on in your family. Oh my goodness, you saw things in mine. And knowing, having this knowing that it's going to be okay. And it is a huge change in that narrative because no longer do you have that hopelessness and that things aren't going to change. And why live if things aren't going to change? You know things are going to change and you don't look back. Like I was talking to somebody recently and they were saying that because I was asking their advice for someone else that it seemed like, you know, that that encouragement that these symptoms are temporary. And, that gets back into another whole rabbit hole of a conversation, but a positive rabbit hole in some way. We were having a conversation with Robert Whitaker of Mad in America, and he and I both are kind of these old people that lived before a lot of these symptoms were seen as a biological issue. Like research said that. But before that research, which a lot of people think is very faulty, people were seen to get well, and people did get well because
Mhm.
they weren't told that, oh, like it's genetic or it's biological or it's a broken brain. and that things are not going to get better. And now that's almost one of the favorite researchers that you see that comes out. And it's in the papers. And, we have this new magical pill that's going to take care of everything. And that's for another conversation. But most of the people tell us that on those medications, that induces the symptoms.
Definitely.
Mhm.
Oh, definitely.
Right?
My mom has a friend
Hmm.
who has been on antidepressants for many, many years.
Hmm.
And keep in mind, anybody listening to this, I'm not a medical doctor, so this is not medical advice. But my mom uh, told me that this friend of hers stopped taking the antidepressants. And within a couple of weeks, she said she felt like a whole new person.
Wow.
And yeah, and she wasn't feeling like she was feeling really bad before.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, I didn't speak to her
But,
directly,
right.
so I don't know everything
Um,
she was
but I'm going to
dealing
add to
with.
this because time after time, we have our case studies say the same thing exactly,
Mm-hmm.
but they say about antipsychotics too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why do people go off antipsychotics? Because being on them is misery.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Mm-hmm.
live in a world, especially in the United States, that if you go off your medicine, oh my gosh, like the sky's going to come falling in.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people go off their medicine in safe ways. And
Yeah.
Mad America talks about this too. And they are fine. We have colleagues in different countries that don't put people on medications.
Mm-hmm.
It to like this young man that I was talking about that's not on medication. He was on so many medications. I think we're going to have the father talking about that in the next podcast. But that he was everything that the father heard the psychiatrist tell him he was, on those medications. And he thought the same thing. And so our next conference is going to be around belief, right? How do we believe in ourselves again? And how do clinicians, how can they believe in their clients? So anyways, my best to everybody. Thank you so much. Margaret, can you stop the recording? And thank you so much for having this opportunity to talk.
Sure. Yep. Thank you.